Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm not going to talk about hemispheres today. It's going to be a purely cognitive talk. There's not going to be neuroscience. Um, so, why is this not working?
You're audible now.
Okay, okay. So the way children acquire language has fascinated psychologists, linguists, parents, teachers, and philosophers ever since there has been language to acquire. And how much more incredible is it when children acquire multiple languages? The process of language acquisition are still being debated. However, over 100 years of research have shown that multilingual children differ from monolingual children in identifiable ways. So first of all, they tend to be more sensitive to phonological differences, and they are more aware of the arbitrary nature of language. That is, they are more sensitive to the basic building blocks of speech, and they're also aware of, or have abstract knowledge about the nature of words and their relationship to the world. The studies I'm going to talk to you about examine the middle ground, the structural aspects of language, specifically morphology. So most models of bilingualism deal with the relations between words and meaning, focusing on the structure of semantic memory and its relationship with the lexicon. This makes sense because bilinguals perceive the world, but talk about it and maybe think about it in different languages. But languages differ often widely in their structural aspects, in morphology and in syntax. And we know that bilinguals code switch from one language to the other, often fluently, sometimes even in the middle of an utterance. It's been shown that bilinguals tend to use shared syntactic characteristics between their languages and also show syntactic priming cross-linguistically. This suggests that there are shared syntactic representations of the languages in the bilinguals' minds. So I want to talk to you about how this shared representation develops even in the very early stages of second language learning. That our children really are not bilinguals, they're emergent bilinguals. I'm going to talk to you about two studies looking at morphological development of Arabic Hebrew and Hebrew Arabic emergent bilinguals. Specifically, how does exposure to the second language affect inflectional morphology or morphological development in the first language? So the first study looked at the identification of morphological structures, and the second study looked at the production of morphological structures. They're both done on different samples from the same population, which are kindergartners from the Arabic Hebrew bilingual schools called Hand in Hand in Israel. There are 6 of them now. In both studies, we used pseudo roots that were inserted into existing word forms and then inflected. And both were done in collaboration with Professor Mila Schwartz and Chanin Vedas. And the second study that I'm going to talk about is actually the PhD dissertation of Chanin Vedas. So a little bit about Arabic and Hebrew. They're sister languages, which are similar in structure, both with very developed morphology. In both, most words are formed by inserting roots that carry the major semantic information into word forms that carry morphological information. Inflectional morphology is carried out by adding affixes to these word forms. And the developmental trajectory of morphological acquisition in Hebrew and Arabic is also quite similar, with a few differences that we'll talk about. So I want to talk a little bit about how similar they are. So first of all, we can look at in terms of verbs. We're going to talk. We see that, for example, when we want to talk about writing, for example, Arabic and Hebrew are essentially cognates. Okay, so the third person masculine singular is unmarked in both. It's katab in Arabic and katab in Hebrew. The feminine singular adds a suffix to the root. So in Arabic it's katbat, and in Hebrew it's katva, and so on. We can see that's true when we add plurals in both languages. Adding plurals is the addition that happens in the addition of a suffix. In Arabic it's im for masculine plurals. In Hebrew it's im for masculine plurals. So this is a teacher, a male teacher, male teachers, and this is male teachers in Hebrew, okay, Mu'allim and Mo'im. And the feminine plural is also similar. It's a suffix in malmat for Arabic female teachers, and morot, so it's ot for Hebrew. What's interesting also, and this is part of the differences between the two languages, Arabic has a very active and generative dual form where we can talk about two anything. So two male teachers are malme. Oops. And two female teachers are malemten, whereas in Hebrew, we don't have the dual. We have the dual in very, very specific situations, which we'll talk about. And you can see that in Hebrew, what we do is we add the word to the plural, to the regular plural. So we don't have this active dual form. In the first study, we had 4 groups. We had monolingual Hebrew speakers, monolingual Arabic speakers. These were children going to monolingual kindergartens. And then we had our bilingual speakers from the hand-in-hand, bilingual with Hebrew as L1 and bilinguals as Arabic as L1. There was no difference between them in age and gender, but unfortunately, what we can see is that in terms of parental education, there was no difference between the 2 monolingual groups, and there was no difference between the 2 bilingual groups. But the parents who send their children to the bilingual schools tended to have significantly more education than the parents who didn't. So these obviously were taken as covariates in the analysis. So the variance due to this was taken out, but our groups were not as well matched as they could have been. In this identification task, the instructions were given in the child's first language, and the child was told, listen to a pair of funny words I will say to you now and repeat after me. And then the child was asked to identify the word that suits a particular category. For example, in Arabic, which word, sagir or sagire, refers to a girl? And in Hebrew, which word, kachash or kachsha, refers to a girl? And they had to choose the one that they thought was correct. And we tested the bilinguals in both their languages. In the Hebrew test, we can see here, what we have here is we have the bilingual Arabic speakers. These are children whose first language is Arabic, but they're tested in Hebrew, the bilingual Hebrew speakers and the monolingual Hebrew speakers. And what we can see is that the Hebrew Arabic bilinguals do better than the Hebrew monolinguals in all the structures that occur in Arabic. So dual, for example, which occurs very seldom in Hebrew, but often in Arabic, the Hebrew speakers who are exposed to Arabic did much better in Hebrew than the monolingual. And that is true of the possessive and also of the civil verb. So the bilingual, and what's important also, I think, is to show that I apologize for the barking dog. It's the neighbor's dog. That the bilingual Arabic speakers did either better or as well as the monolingual Hebrew speakers. In the Arabic test, what we see is that the bilinguals always did better than the monolinguals. The Arabic children whose home language is Arabic always did better than the monolingual Arabic speakers. And that the Hebrew Arabic bilinguals do as well or better than the monolingual Arabic speakers in structures that occur also in Hebrew. Okay, so we're seeing cross-language effects here. So the conclusions, this study has been published. It's quite an old study. And the conclusions are, first of all, that there was never interference that resulted from exposure to the second language. Bilinguals did as well or better than their monolingual peers. So this is important for situations where parents have to decide whether they're sending their child to be a bilingual or not. And the Hebrew bilinguals, the L1 Hebrew bilinguals benefited most. And we concluded that this is because Arabic has more complex morphology, and so than Hebrew, and this sharpened their sensitivity to the morphology in Hebrew. So duals occur in Hebrew only rarely and only for specific objects like parts of the body or time and so on. And in Arabic, this is a strong generative paradigm. And noun possessives are rarely used in Hebrew and frequently used in Arabic. And I just realized that I didn't explain the noun possessives, so I need to go back. Oops, here. So I want to talk about the possessives, okay? So in both languages, we have both noun possessives, that is a bound morpheme that connects to the noun. And you can see that in Hebrew and Arabic, they're identical. It's beiti, my house, and beiti in Hebrew. And there's also syntax possessive, where you can say, my house, this is house of mine. Okay, so by tabai in Arabic and by chili in Hebrew. Now, in Hebrew, mostly people use the syntax possessive, and in Arabic, mostly people use the noun possessive. So that is a big difference between the two languages. Even though the two structures occur in both languages, they just have different frequencies. And now we can see why the dual made such a big difference here. These were always noun duals. Okay. In the second study, we examined the effects of the similarity and differences in morphological forms. The morphology of Arabic and Hebrew is on a continuum of similarity from phonological overlap, as we saw, where we have cognates, and also even if the nouns themselves are not cognates, the suffixes or the affixes are cognates. They're identical. For example, in Beiti, or it's like you say, Kitabi is my book in Arabic, and Sifri is my book in Hebrew. We hypothesized that the similarity of morphological forms between the languages would differentially affect morphological learning. And children here were tested at 2 time points: in the beginning of the school year, October, November, and at the end of the kindergarten school year, May and June. So there was a 6 months difference between the 2 time points, and we could actually look at the development of morphological knowledge. So I want to give you an example of the continuum of similarity. So we talk about things that, for example, are phonologically overlapping. So for example, in the past tense, the third person masculine singular in both Arabic and Hebrew is unmarked. So akal in Arabic, achal in Hebrew. We have suffixes that differ by a consonant. So for example, we looked at the masculine plurals, and in Arabic it's in, and in Arabic it's in. Okay, so in both situations, it's a plural, but they differ by one consonant. We also have suffixes that differ by a vowel. For example, the plurals of feminine, where in Arabic it's at, and in Hebrew it's ot. Okay, so we have malmat, those are female teachers, and morot, those are female teachers in Hebrew. We get more different. We have suffixes that differ by a consonant and a vowel, which is, for example, the duals. So in Arabic we have usbu'an, and in Hebrew we have shbu'ain. So in Arabic, the dual for masculine is en, and in Hebrew it's ain. Okay, so they differ both in the vowel and in the consonant. And then there are prefixes that differ by a consonant. There's really not very much overlap here. Okay, now in the second study, the participants were very carefully matched. And again, we had our 4 groups. We had Arabic Hebrew bilinguals and Arabic monolinguals, and Hebrew Arabic bilinguals and Hebrew monolinguals. And what we can see that in none of the factors do they differ, either in the parental education or for the bilinguals in terms of how long they were in the bilingual school, or that is how long they were in the bilingual school. We'll talk about exposure in a second. So here we have very well matched samples. Now the test was built on non-existent triconsonantal root that conformed to the phonotactic constraints of Arabic and Hebrew. So the words were built to test the children's awareness of 5 inflectional morphology groups, specifically plurals, duals, past tense, imperative, and possessives. And so we showed child-friendly pictures, and we told the children We're going to play the aliens game together. I will show you a picture of some aliens that came to Earth from Mars. They speak a language that is similar to our language. So in Arabic, it was to Arabic, and in Hebrew, it was Hebrew. Let's think together how they speak to one another. So here's an example. So we have, they saw this picture, and we said, we call one alien Rashle, that's for the Arabic speaking kids, or Marbina in Hebrew. How do we call many? And so the child has to give us the plural, the word with the plural suffix. Or we call one alien Haf in Arabic, or Gain in Hebrew. How do we call two? Okay? And for the past tense, for example, today these aliens are bisaju. Okay, this is Arabic verb in the past tense, or mizapshin in Hebrew in past. Yesterday, what did they do? Okay, so we give them the present tense and we ask them for the past tense of the verb. So here are the results. So everybody, first of all, overall, everybody improved over 6 months. This is time 1 and time 2. This is the beginning of the year. This is the end of the year. And what we have are the bilinguals are in solid lines and the monolinguals are in dotted lines. Arabic speakers are in black and Hebrew speakers are in red. And what we can see is, first of all, is that in situations that don't occur very often in Hebrew, the Hebrew monolinguals didn't do very well. And for example, in the dual, they don't have a slope. They didn't, because they're not exposed to this form. Okay. Whereas the Hebrew speaking bilinguals are exposed to the form and get better at it as time goes by. Okay. So this is the percent correct on the test. And what we can see is that everybody got better in everything, but at different rates. And I want to show you the rates. This is the percent success differences in the expression test between T1 and T2. It's essentially the slope of learning. And I think it's important to notice, for example, that overall, we can see that the bilinguals, there's a trend towards a bilingual advantage. The bilinguals gained more, okay? And we can see, for example, in the dual where the native Hebrew speakers aren't exposed to this, and the native and the bilingual Hebrew speakers are, and because they're exposed to it in Arabic, and they get much better at the end of the year than they were in the beginning of the year. This is the difference between scores in time 1 and time 2. We also see this also in the possessive because it exists. It's used more in Arabic than it is in Hebrew. This is the noun possessive, the e affix that's added to the noun. And we can see that there are situations where both bilingual groups gained more than the monolingual groups. So I presented 2 studies that show substantial cross-language effects for emergent bilingual kindergartners in their L1. Close perusal of the specific morphological categories revealed differential effects, and we suggest that these are related to 3 types of relationships. The concept, for example, both Arabic and Hebrew have the concept of a plural for nouns. We know that not all languages do, but both Arabic and Hebrew do. The rule, in both languages, the plural is created by the addition of a suffix. And the structure, that is, the phonological structure is similar. So in both, in Arabic, for example, for male plural is in, and in Hebrew it's in. So and in the plural for feminine is at, and in Hebrew it's ot. So what we have is the phonological structure is also similar between the 2 languages. In addition, we added the strength of the paradigm. Okay, so what we have here is we have the rule. I looked at the situations where both groups of bilinguals showed gains. Okay, more gains than monolinguals in the 6 months that passed. And what are the paradigms that happened in? First of all, the rule was always shared, okay? And the paradigm was always strong. That is, it was strong in Arabic. And what we have here in the situation where it's weak in Arabic, we have both groups showed the gains. It was weak in Arabic, and because it doesn't happen a lot, and it's shared. Excuse me. It's strong in Arabic and it's weak in Hebrew. Now, why did the Hebrew speakers? Excuse me, I made a mistake. Okay, in both languages, the paradigm is strong, except in the situation of the Hebrew. And when it was weak in Hebrew, the Hebrew speakers showed more gains, right? Because they're than the monolinguals, because they are exposed to this paradigm, whereas the monolinguals are not. In the second situation, wait a minute. Why is this not? There we go. In the second situation, we looked at situations where Hebrew speakers showed gains, but Arabic speakers did not. And that was the case where the paradigm was always strong in Arabic. And why would the Arabic bilinguals not show a gain? Because the monolingual Arabic speakers are also exposed to this paradigm as well over the year. And they all get better, but the bilinguals don't get more better than the monolinguals. Whereas the Hebrew speakers, because it's weak in Hebrew, that the monolingual Hebrew speakers are not exposed to it a lot, whereas the bilingual Hebrew speakers are exposed to it in Arabic, they do show more gains. Okay, so we're trying to find the logic of when do the bilinguals show a gain and when do they not. And the last situation, here we go, is paradigms in which neither groups showed gains over the monolinguals. And that's a situation where we have a strong paradigm in both languages, okay? And there's no phonological representations. And this is true in the imperative as well, okay? The phonological representations are not shared. And so here, both groups of bilinguals developed just like the monolinguals because they're not really exposed to it in the other language, and it's strong enough in their language that the monolinguals get better just as well as the bilinguals. And the final situation is the possible critical role of shared phonology. So here we have two cases of the past tense, the third person masculine where we have shared phonological representations, and the second person masculine plural where we don't have shared phonological representations. In both situations, in the situation where there's shared phonological representations, both groups showed gains. When they're not shared, both groups did not show gains. Okay, so it seems like it may be that the phonological representation, the shared phonological representation, may be crucial here. We have the same thing in the imperative, where when there were shared vowels, the bilinguals did improve, and when they were not shared, they didn't improve. So Arabic L1 bilinguals benefited when all three categories were shared and when the paradigm was strong. Hebrew L1 bilinguals benefited in almost all categories, again, probably because the more complex morphology of Arabic sharpened their perception of Hebrew morphology. For example, the ability to use duals. Okay, and importantly, again, and this is important in Israel, where we want to develop the bilingual schools, neither group showed interference from their L2. Their development in L1 was better or just as good as the morphological ability of the monolinguals. So what I want to finish is to say the cross-language transfer of morphological knowledge occurs between typologically similar languages. But is dependent on the similarities and differences among these paradigms and is systematic. Now, we originally wanted to also give these tests in bilingual, in Hebrew, but English bilingual schools, but we couldn't you couldn't organize that kind. They didn't want to let us in to test their children. So right now we have half the date. We show how this happens in typologically similar languages. It's very interesting to see what happens in typologically dissimilar languages. I mean, it's been shown by Barak and Bialystok that the more typologically similar the languages, the more cross-language transfer there is. But it's interesting to see whether the factors, for example, of phonological overlap or the strength and weaknesses of the rules also affects this kind of cross-language transfer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We are open for questions from the audience.
I'm going to see if I can stop the share just a second. Whoops. This was extra data that we don't need to. There we go. There we go. I did it a little bit fast, so hope it's okay.
Any questions from the audience?
I have a question for Ramesh about the heritage languages. I mean, you were talking about how they're similar. The tribe that you were talking about, how it's similar to languages that border that area, and that would be a really interesting topic to look at, is the cross-language transfer from, and in what kind. Would you have more cross-language transfer from one language or from another, depending on your similarity, on the typological similarity to the heritage language?
I will not have very detailed information at this point, but what I know from my readings is that the location that we are now, there are 6 historically, tribal heritage languages that are spoken by select groups of people. And I looked at the statistics that the offsprings they have been migrating to nearby cities like Chennai and other. They are picking up Tamil and some English. So, and these languages do differ a lot from one another. So both in their syntax and morphosemantics and phonology as well. So we at this point in time, I will not be able to say how different they are from one another. But you are right in sensing that if we get clues that they are very different and that they're practicing both languages in spite of the differences, the children are learning both the languages. It would be great to look at that aspect of cross-lingual, cross-language transfer vis-a-vis speaking, listening, and other cognitive variables. So I think Arul, do you have some idea on this, or Ramesh, you can word?
Yes, they are completely different. For example, if you are looking at Toda and Badaga, they are, completely different. So doing a study on those 2 Todas as well as Kotas, will make it, pretty useful for us, especially from the perspective that we are talking about. And in fact, tomorrow, if possible, we'll be visiting both the villages. And all these languages do not have a script. Yes, Zohar.
So I was just thinking about, because in India, everybody knows 5 languages, right? I mean, so it would be interesting to see whether people who are multilingual, and do they tend to, how does that affect? I think it's also related to your sociolinguistic stuff. I mean, do they tend to code switch into a language that's more similar or a language that's less similar? And in what, at what level? I mean, is it phonological? Is it syntactic? Is it morphological? And when, under what situations? So if they're on their own, or if they're talking to people who know the same languages that they do, will they tend, we would predict, right, that they would code switch into the language that's more similar than the one that's different, right? That's a prediction, but I guess it hasn't been tested.
I think I'll ask Ramesh to respond to that. Who is the Badaga speaker himself? And he speaks Badaga, Tamil, Kannada as well. He's right here. I think Ramesh would do. You could do it.
Yes. Ma'am, can you just repeat the question, please? Sorry, I really couldn't concentrate.
I'm sorry. The languages that you know are differ in their distance from each other. Some are more distant, some are more different, and some are more similar. And the question is, when you do code switch, does that affect, does that similarity affect your code switching, which language you choose to code switch to?
Yeah. So basically talking about, we have 6 tribes with all very different. All the 6 have their own uniqueness in languages, cultural aspects, as well as their lifestyle, food, everything is unique on individually. But when it comes to point of communication aspect, so what happens is here, Badaga is the language used as a lingua franca, which is understood by all the 6 communities plus Badaga, the 7th indigenous community in here. So talking about the code switching here, so the dominating language, which is Tamil. So Tamil is mainly used by the present generation. Whereas talking about the previous generation people, everyone knows Badaga. And understanding each other languages, so they mostly use the Tamil, which is dominating as the major language in Nilgiris for their communication aspect. And when it comes to point of rituals, so in rituals, what they do is, for instance, a Kota tribe, he is basically what you call as artisans, like they play music for the rituals of Badagas as well as for Todas. So this community mainly, they are interlinked for all the aspects, even let that be a death ceremony or a marriage ceremony or any kind of ceremonies. So without these 3 communities, I mean Badagas, Todas and Kotas, so everyone has to be, they have some kind of representation from one village or from one community. So in that case, total the whole all the communities are bilingual, there were no doubt at all. And some of maybe close to 10%, or they can speak all the 6 languages.
But do you
This is
notice any systematicity in their code switching? Like if they're talking to each other and you lose a word. So if I lose a word in Hebrew, I'll say it in English, or I'll say it, or the other way around. But that's because I only know 2 languages. But if if someone knows more than 2 languages, then they actually have a choice of what language, which word or which structure, which, for example, syntactic structure is more available to them. And I wonder if you've ever looked at the systematicity of that kind of code switching.
So basically, so looking at that point, like basically they are more comfortable in conversing in Tamil, which all the communities can speak. Even today, when we had been to the Kota village, like, and our conversation was basically, we started with Tamil, then I switched on to my community language, that's Badaga. Badaga is, as I told you, it's a common language which is understood by the what do you call the older generation people. So we met a Kota man who was around 62 years old, and he was very fluent in Badaga, and he was explaining us and he was mediating us today, the whole scenario. The one interesting thing in Nilgiris is that this is a hub. In such a small district, we have 6 plus 1, 7 communities with very different, unique character-wise or language-wise or anthropological side. Everything is very unique. You find in one hub. That is something interesting.
Yeah.
That's why we thought of we should have a plan to visit it here and to explore things physically. And of course, we are expecting something more interesting when we visit the field tomorrow. with Ramesh Mishra
I
ji.
wish I was
So
there.
this is
Yeah, so it looks like it's an area that has maintained its uniqueness in spite of these various groups speaking unique languages. But as you said, one language is one language is understood by all of them. There may be a situation where for social transactional encounters, Tamil would be used, and for their own situations when other outsiders are not present, they may speak their own languages. Also, sociolinguistically speaking,
But
the
do they mix?
one.
Do they mix the languages?
This data, I do not know whether in a sentence they switch between one of these languages than Tamil, or whether they, depending on the situation on the interlocutor, they shift to Tamil to
Right.
make things more clearer. We need to study and gather data.
Yeah.
We are not in a position to say that. Yeah.
And it's, I also want to emphasize that the children that we tested aren't really bilinguals. Okay, they can't really speak the other language. They're emergent bilinguals. They've been in kindergarten, you know, and maybe they went to the bilingual nursery school, but they are exposed to the other language. I mean, the Arabic speaking children know more Hebrew because Hebrew is the majority language of the country, and so they're exposed to more Hebrew. But even they are not, you can't say, you wouldn't call them bilingual. They're emergent bilinguals. And already we see these effects on their morphological representations in their L1. So we see these very, very early effects, cross-linguistic effects.
I think the probably the variable would be the density of the interactive situation, how close by they are to one another, and how frequently they hear the other language and other speakers they encounter.
Well, right. So the Arabic children, the L1 Arabic children hear a lot of Hebrew. Okay, there's
Right.
cartoons and Arabic speaking children will watch cartoons in Arabic and in Hebrew. And there's also a lot of Hebrew in their situation. All their parents know Hebrew. But the Hebrew speakers don't hear that much Arabic. Okay.
Sure, yeah.
So they are exposed to Arabic and they usually don't watch the Arab cartoons and so on. And not all of their maybe even a minority of their parents.
The situation in Israel is typical because of the many other regions that we know. But here, these various speech communities stay or reside in different hamlets, and there may be like few
Right.
hundred people
Yeah,
that are.
they don't mix in the villages. There's mixture in the cities. But
This he has to say whether they are invited to one another situations or they encounter often one another, or whether they really have the social chance to talk to one another, because we need to also, because the gentrification and the government's what's your grassroots level political setups like villages are under a sarpanch, and all this is they're not uniquely outside all these orbits. So the participative nature of democracy also induces a certain format of language behavior in all of these people. They have to get by living speaking the language that is desired by the bureaucratic necessity of language use.
right.
But
And
we
I
will
also want
explore it.
to point out what you said about social class,
Right.
because all of our children were actually, all their parents all had at least one academic degree. So so you could say if you use parental education as a measure of SES, all our children were of high SES. And so I want to limit our results to say that this may be true of the high social class monolinguals as well as high social class bilinguals, and we don't know how that will. I think what the point that you made about social class requires more research.
Yeah, I mean, in India, this has been, at least in certain disciplines like this, cognitive science or experimental psychology. This has not been the case, but I think sociologists and other people have had a lot to say and write on social class, but caste in India is far more vibrant as a variable than social class, because they may be together in some situations. But since this is a country rapidly changing itself organically, so there is rapid transition between these slabs. So people with one generation or a job or migrating to city can change their own minds, their perception of their own class. Because please remember that all these American studies, they administer questionnaires where people have to say that how they look at themselves as a member of a particular class. Like, do I think I'm middle class or low? That's more in economic, social terms. Education is a key variable there. But in India, it might not be so, at least in this community. I don't know really how they perceive themselves with regard to outsiders or among themselves, or how they may also perceive if somebody from them has gone out and has become more as urban and lives a different lifestyle. So these are intriguing things that we have no idea about and how they influence cognition. So we need to branch out and create more avenues of research with all these ideas. That's all we'll do when we're all here in November. We will have all these people will be there. We'll have big opportunity to really plan out key research themes. Yeah. All right.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.